And I want you all to know that we are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake.
We certainly hear that word a lot these days, and political news isn't the only thing whose realness is often questioned. The guidance and information you get about investing, and many of the investment strategies themselves may also be just plain fake, and therefore extremely dangerous. It's that time again, time to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. Let's get started. Get ready to separate reality from myth.
With us, David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
But David Scranton says, hey, not so fast.
How does it affect the markets? How does it affect the economy? Thanks to efficiencies in new technology and a staff of veteran analysts and portfolio managers, Sound Income Strategy strives to set new standards and bring institutional style investing to your portfolio. At times, artificial can have its advantages, whether it means artificial sweeteners, artificial intelligence, or perhaps an artificial Christmas tree, depending upon your opinion. But I think most of us would agree there's no advantage in receiving artificial or fabricated news and information. And certainly no one wants phony information that promotes financial tools or strategies that are, in and of themselves, fake. Yet thanks to cultural and economic changes that have occurred over the lifetime of baby boomers, and especially in the last 10 years, both of those dangers are more prevalent today than ever before. We're going to discuss these dangers and how to avoid falling victim to them on today's show. And joining me will be businessman and author Robert Kiyosaki. He's the founder of Rich Global, LLC, and the Rich Dad Company. His latest book is called Fake. Fake Money, Fake Teachers, Fake Assets. How lies are making the poor and middle class poorer.
You know, Donald Trump's a friend of mine. We wrote 2 books together. But I'm not Republican or Democrat, and he says things he shouldn't say. So we'll leave it at that.
We'll also speak with Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services in Melbourne, Florida.
Well, it's very easy to get spun around and entranced in the financial dogma that I call it of the media. But as an investor or as a financial advisor, you really need to maintain objectivity and try and look for things underneath that will give you an edge in terms of information.
But first, let's review why I believe that today's stock market is, yes, to a large degree, fake. Well, if you're a regular viewer, you know I frequently talk about this new age of economic uncertainty that we're in. Much of this uncertainty stems from the fact that the financial markets and the entire global economy have become, I believe, overly dependent upon artificial factors. You know, there's a fundamental and dangerous disconnect between the stock market and economic realities. This movement toward fakeness, if you will, and artificiality in the economy and markets, really, if you think about it, began decades ago, but it reached new and increasingly dangerous levels in the 10 years since the financial crisis. That's when the Federal Reserve really began rewriting the playbook. And it didn't take long for other central banks around the world to follow suit. This rewrite really began months before the start of the financial crisis, when then Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke called an emergency meeting. The Fed agreed to lower short-term interest rates by 0.75% that day, following warning signs about an upcoming subprime mortgage crisis and with fears of a looming recession. Now that 0.75 point drop was triple the adjustment that they typically make. And today that emergency meeting in January 2008 is seen as having been a pivotal event. It was a clear sign that the Fed was going to be willing to play by a new set of rules in response to the next financial crisis, a sign that intended to focus more on artificial strategies aimed perhaps at quick fixes than long-term approaches that allowed the markets to ultimately function more naturally. Sure enough, once the recession and stock market crash hit, the Fed started what turned out to be multiple rounds of quantitative easing. This involved buying up trillions of dollars of mortgage-backed securities and treasury bonds. Wall Street loves quantitative easing, as you know, because it created cheap money and drove everyday investors up the risk curve, as we like to call it, meaning into the stock market. How? By making other investment options, more conservative options, appear less attractive. So the stock market soon became more dependent on the Fed's artificial strategies than on economic fundamentals, and as a result, the market rose by over 300% between 2009 and last year. And this is all in spite of GDP growth throughout most of that time that was barely 2%. In fact, many years even lower. While the Fed's experimentation started under Ben Bernanke, it then continued under the next Fed chair, Janet Yellen, who also inherited the job of eventually ending quantitative easing and trying to normalize the Fed policy once again. But that has proven difficult, largely because of the stock market's new addiction to artificial stimulus. Now, as you regular viewers know, I've always likened the Fed's overuse of quantitative easing to that of steroid use in athletes. Not only because steroids enhance an athlete's performance artificially, but because their effects can continue in the body long after the athlete stops taking them. That's why even though the third and final round of quantitative easing actually ended late in 2014, in spite of that, the financial markets are still dependent and being driven by, directly or indirectly, fake or artificial factors. Those include the Federal Reserve keeping short-term interest rates historically low even after quantitative easing ended, and as well as the ongoing quantitative easing programs in many countries abroad, especially throughout Europe. The bottom line is that we all know the potential long-term dangers of artificial substances like anabolic steroids, especially once the body becomes dependent upon them. Eventually, the body has to break that dependency, no matter how painful this process might be. By the same token, eventually the economy and markets have to make fundamental sense again. And that process is also likely to be extremely painful. But it isn't just the Federal Reserve that's responsible for using artificial strategies to manipulate markets. Artificiality, if you will, has also become the norm for many corporations. Why? When it comes to pleasing stockholders, even at the potential expense of the economy and everyday investors like you. And we'll talk about that just more coming up in a bit. And now it's time to welcome our first guest, author, businessman, Robert Kiyosaki. He's the founder of Rich Global LLC and the Rich Dad Company, which uses books and videos to educate people on business and finance. Robert's written more than 25 books, including the popular Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. His latest book is called Fake. Fake Money, Fake Teachers, Fake Assets. How lies are making the poor and the middle class even poorer. Robert, thanks so much for joining us here today on The Income Generation.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the time. You guys are a very, very popular show.
Well, thank you for that. So I don't understand. I mean, you know, we could, if there's anybody we can trust, it's the media, right? Are you trying to say that 100% of what the media tells us is not real?
Well, yeah, I think it was, Donald Trump's a friend of mine. We wrote 2 books together. But I'm not Republican or Democrat, and he says things he shouldn't say. So we'll leave it at that. But when he popularized fake news, I just started laughing. And, since then, you and I were just talking before the show came on. I used to watch Jerry Springer a lot, But now I just watch Fox and CNN, and it's just one big Jerry Springer show. You got Trump on one side and the Democrats on the other. I mean, today Bernie Sanders looks conservative. And
yeah.
What a circus it is.
Yeah, Jerry Springer's a good way to say it. It was, I remember back to having 16 Republicans all running for the ticket, and that alone was Jerry Springerish. And I think this year we might see it on the Democratic side, as we saw it a few years ago on the Republican side. But what advice do you have for?
What's entertaining was how Trump took them off one by one, just one by one, just knocked them off.
Yep. It's the kind of guy I would not want to play chess against. Let's put it that way. So, as you know, our viewers are the income generation. How can our viewers, the income generation, how can they sort through the media hype to determine what's real from what's fake?
Well, that's a very good question, because the reason I wrote my book, Fake, if I can unabashedly hold it up here like this, is what I'm concerned about is fake money, fake teachers, fake assets. And, Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, he just came on the air saying this gap between the rich and everybody else is now too dangerous. And he was on CNBC, and they gave him a hard time for that. They said, how can you say that? Ray, you're a billionaire. How can you say it's too it's too big. He says, it is too big. And the reason I write and Dalio speaks and all this, if it gets any wider, we have social unrest. And we already have it in our political campaigns. Now we have I'm not Republican or Democrat and all that, but we now have people, they want free education, free housing, free food, free medical, free manicures, free pedicures. I'm going, what happened to America? And people are so afraid because the economy has shifted and they don't know what to do. So that's why for the last 22 years since I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I've been concerned about this gap between the rich and everybody else. It's dangerous.
And the gap's gotten a lot bigger in the last 22 years. But do you think the politicians are finally recognizing it? Do you feel like they're finally addressing it all, or are they just burying their heads in the sand collectively and pretending it's not an issue?
I think they're burying their heads someplace else.
Okay, fair enough.
Do you know what I mean? I don't. I'm not Republican or Democrat, but they nailed Bernie Sanders as, don't you have free medical and free retirement and all the stuff these guys get? So how can they care? Because that old saying, I got mine. And so every politician, as soon as they get in office, they're set for life.
Right.
And when you look at the pension plans of America, my poor dad, who was a PhD, head of education for the state of Hawaii, all he worked for was that steady paycheck and a pension. And today, new reports are coming out that the pensions for state employees, such as teachers, firefighters, and police officers, many of them are bankrupt, like Illinois is bankrupt, Kentucky is bankrupt, New Jersey is bankrupt, California is bankrupt. So suddenly, all this idea of not only job security, but pension security is going to come bubbling to the surface. And that's why I write, that's why Dalio speaks. In fact, that's why Donald Trump and I got together back in 2004, is we asked the same question. Why don't we have financial education in our schools?
Yeah.
Why don't we teach people about money?
And I want to, and Robert, as soon as we get back from our break, I want to talk to you about that, why you believe that we don't see more of that in schools today, or any of it for that matter. But we need to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment. Robert Kiyosaki and David Scranton here on The Income Generation.
David J. Scranton, Amazon bestselling author, money manager, and national TV host, is on a mission to educate baby boomers about the need to shift from growth to income. If you're at or near retirement, focusing on income over growth can make all the difference in the quality of your retirement. Each week, David educates America on his Newsmax TV show, The Income Generation, where he provides special reports and more to teach baby boomers about the income model.
Call now for a free copy of David's latest book. Go to soundincomestrategies.com/income to find out more.
If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation.
Let's try this. I'll take the pencil and I'll place it into my pocket. Now, if the pen is here, then that must mean that the pencil is here. Watch this.
Let's face it, we all love a good magic trick, especially when it's done so well that we think we're actually seeing magic. We know deep down that it's really an illusion, but we really want to believe that the magician is performing magic. We want the magician essentially to fool us into thinking that it's real. However, we don't want any illusions when it comes to the people who run the companies that our retirement accounts depend on for growth and security. We want honesty and transparency, not fake strategies and artificial tricks. While there are laws in place to prevent companies from practicing outright deception about their earnings and about their overall financial health, there are other legal practices that they can and they do engage in. At one point we discussed many times on the show that stock buybacks, for example, are one of these strategies, which occur when a company takes profits, cash reserves, or even borrowed money to purchase its own shares of stock on the public markets. This practice, if you will, was actually illegal in the United States until the Reagan administration, but it's become very common ever since. Now, what's troubling about this is that in recent years, in the middle of all the government's artificial manipulation in the economy, corporate America has seen a major spike in its own corporate buybacks. Between 2004 and 2014, companies spent about $7 trillion on buying back their own shares. And just last year alone, a record $1 trillion was spent on corporate buybacks. Now, low corporate bond yields since the financial crisis have driven companies to actually borrow money in the bond market. And many of them have used these loans to boost their stock prices through share buybacks. This works by the simple law of supply and demand. If a company's financial net worth essentially doesn't change, but it has fewer outstanding stock shares due to buybacks, then the value of each share must be higher. By reducing the supply, essentially, when the demand increases, the price increases that much more. Now, this obviously concerns economists. Why? Because buybacks purchased with borrowed money can weaken what many experts believe should be the real measure of strength for a company, and not its stock price or even its earnings, but its balance sheet. It's probably no coincidence, of course, that the historic rise in corporate borrowing and share buybacks has coincided with the stock market rising to historic levels over the last 10 years. And that rise was fairly steady until last year's extreme volatility took hold. Here's the point. Just like quantitative easing, the practice of buybacks can be seen as yet another fake or artificial driver of this fake artificial stock market, a smoke and mirrors tactic meant to create the illusion of strength over a foundation of instability. As a matter of fact, some analysts have said that if it weren't for buybacks, last year's historic levels of market volatility might have been even worse. Now, that's really a concern if you think about it, if you understand that another major stock market correction is not only likely, but essentially is long overdue according to the hard lessons of stock market history. Left to fluctuate naturally, I believe the market probably would have begun that third major market drop, that next correction, sometime approximately 5 years ago in 2013, 2014. That's when all the major indices regained their previous peaks from before the 2007 to 2009 market drop. That's also when many in the financial media began proclaiming that the stock market had permanently recovered. But if that were true, then the long-term secular bear market cycle that I believe we're in today would have set a world record as the shortest in history. In fact, it would also have set two other records. The first secular bear market cycle to end with price-to-earnings ratios still in the double digits, and the first to end with fewer than 3 or more major corrections within it. Now, I think most would agree. The odds of anything or anyone achieving 3 world records are essentially pretty slim, which is why I continue to believe that this third major market drop is imminent. And if it follows the patterns of market history, it could possibly be even a bigger drop than the first two. The one from 2000 to 2002, that was about 50%. And then from 2007 to 2009, that was almost 60%. In fact, this secular bear market cycle had been playing out in classic fashion until 2009. Why did it end then? Well, because that's when we started to currently rely heavily on artificial manipulation. While this artificiality may have delayed the next major correction, it won't prevent it. As I said before, sooner or later the markets have to make fundamental sense again. And last year's extreme volatility could actually be a sign that it'll happen sooner rather than later. Now, you might be wondering, why isn't the financial media or why isn't my own advisor talking more about all this dangerous artificiality? Well, unfortunately, it's because a lot of information, ideas touted by the media and touted by a lot of advisors is, in its own way, also fake or artificial. Sometimes intentionally, but sometimes for other reasons. And we'll talk more about that coming up in just a bit. Right now, it's time to welcome back businessman and author Robert Kiyosaki, the author of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series, and his latest book called Fake. Fake money, fake teachers, fake assets, how lies are making the poor and middle class poorer. Thanks for sticking around. So, Robert, why is it then that you think that, as we ended up the last segment, why is it that we don't get more financial literacy education in the school system today, even in universities. Why do you think that is?
Well, as I wrote here in this book, fake money, fake teachers, fake assets. The big problem is education. And the reason I call them fake teachers is a lot of time teachers know nothing about money. My poor dad, PhD from Stanford University, University of Chicago, and Northwestern, he knew nothing about money. And then he lost his job. And our whole family suffered after that. So that kind of when I was a Marine pilot in Vietnam, and I came marching back from Vietnam, and my old man's unemployed. And he tells me to go back to school, get my MBA and stuff like this. And my rich dad says, don't follow in your father's footsteps. So instead, talking about income generation, my rich dad taught me, he says, if you're going to learn about debt and taxes, you've got to take real estate. Mm-hmm. So when I was 27 years old, I signed up for my first real estate course. It was 3 days long, $385. It made me a multimillionaire over and over and over again. And then I dropped out of the MBA program.
Well, and you're a capitalist at heart, and thanks to your rich dad, he taught you how to do that. But in the minute or so we have left, tell us, are you one of the people that perhaps buys into the conspiracy theory that there are a few rich, wealthy families throughout the country, and they almost want to keep the poor and the middle class under their thumb, so that there's a reason with their influence that we're actually not being educated about financial matters in school? Do you espouse that theory at all, or do you think that's not true? It's just ignorance?
No, I don't go into the theory because I just look at reality. Instead of fake, look at reality. What does school teach you about money? Nothing. Balance a checkbook, big deal. FICO score, big deal. What we have to learn about today is debt, taxes, and crashes. You look at President Trump and myself. We're real estate guys. We use 100% debt. We pay no taxes legally, and crashes make us richer. And that's really what they should be teaching kids, but they don't tell you that. They tell you invest for the long term, buy, hold, and pray. And as you know, with you call high frequency trading and all that, all the rules have changed in the world of money and investing.
And it seems like they teach you how to be you go to school to learn how to become a good employee, not how to be entrepreneurial, not how to be a capitalist. Right. And buy and hold in a 401k is just part of that. So unfortunately, we need to take another commercial break because time flies when you're having fun. So stay with us if you can, Robert. And you stay with us too. We have many more words of wisdom here from our new friend, Robert Kiyosaki. I'm David Scranton. You're watching The Income Generation. I'll be right back.
David J. Scranton, Amazon bestselling author, money manager, and national TV host, is on a mission to educate baby boomers about the need to shift from growth to income. If you're at or near retirement, focusing on income over growth can make all the difference in the quality of your retirement. Each week, David educates America on his Newsmax TV show, The Income Generation, where he provides special reports and more to teach baby boomers about the income model.
Call now for a free copy of David's latest book. Go to soundincomestrategies.com/income to find out more.
It's called fake news. You are fake news.
Sir.
They have been fake news for a long time. It's all fake news. It's phony stuff.
Even before the president made fake news a term that we hear now almost daily, media bias has already been a controversial issue. But just as artificial strategies by the Fed and corporations have escalated in the last 10 years, the prevalence of artificial or fake news has also skyrocketed. The main reason, of course, is the growth of the internet, both in terms of content and in terms of usage. Generally speaking, the internet has made it more difficult than ever to distinguish real, credible information from fake, fabricated content. There are many different types of fake news out there, but for our purposes, we're talking about information that is in some way self-serving. It has a hidden agenda, which is often profit-based. Obviously, this can be a major problem when it comes to financial news and information. Many Americans today base their savings and investment decisions, at least in part, on information that they get through online financial programs, magazines, blogs, and other websites. But if the source of that information has a hidden motive that puts the needs of the network, the author, or the blogger ahead of your needs, then the question becomes, how trustworthy can it really be? As I've explained in some of my books, bias in the financial media isn't always malicious. It's just how the system works. Once again, it starts with the reality that a Wall Street CEO's main fiduciary responsibility is to his shareholders, not his customers. And how can he best please those shareholders? Well, one way to increase revenue and to increase profits is by getting as many customers as possible, including you, to buy and to stay invested in the company's stock-based products for as long a period as possible. So to meet the responsibility of pleasing shareholders in this way, a Wall Street CEO essentially has an obligation to speak optimistically about the stock market as often as possible, and to downplay its risks, even in highly uncertain times like these, with the market artificially inflated and market history saying that a major correction is long overdue. And this one simple fact creates a trickle-down effect that makes it almost necessary for much of the financial media to put the goals and needs of their owners and advertisers ahead of their customers. Think about it. Where do media outlets get most of their revenue from? The answer is from advertisers, not customers or subscribers. So it only makes sense that they would want to keep these advertisers happy. They don't want to risk biting the hand that feeds them, in essence. Now, this is fine, of course, except when pleasing advertisers runs counter to serving the interest of consumers. So the next time some supposed expert on television is telling you that the stock market is the only game in town, and that you'd be a fool not to have most of your money in mutual funds, for example, ask yourself this: is that advice really for my benefit, or perhaps could it be for the benefit of the station's advertisers and their CEOs? If the answer is the latter, then what you're hearing is essentially fake news. It has a hidden agenda. Because remember that CEO's first responsibility is to shareholders. And how can he best please the shareholders? By keeping as many customers as possible invested in the company's stock-based products at all times, regardless of the risk level. And thus, that trickle-down effect I mentioned makes it basically necessary for many analysts and experts in the financial media to also speak optimistically about the stock market at all times. This effect also applies to many financial advisors whose business models are built around conventional and, I would argue, outdated stock-based strategies. They too have a vested interest in speaking optimistically about the stock market as often as possible. Essentially, they all become what I call Wall Street cheerleaders. And as our guest today, Robert Kiyosaki, might say, that makes them fake teachers. The news and information they're sharing isn't really balanced, objective, or even relevant to today's investors. Why? Because it has that hidden agenda. Here's the bottom line. It's important to approach media-based advice and information with a good degree of healthy skepticism. However, that doesn't mean that you can't potentially find helpful or valuable information through the financial media. But you probably don't want to make any financial decisions based exclusively off this information. It's important to dig deeper, to look further, and to discuss the information with a qualified, objective financial advisor, one who can help you apply it to your own individual situation. Now, it's also important, as our guest today has noted, to arm yourself in advance with basic financial literacy or financial education. We'll talk more about that in just a bit. Now it's time to welcome back author, businessman, and our new friend, Robert Kiyosaki, author of the book, Fake. So Robert, I know that teachers, they're more textbook based. Maybe they lived in a theoretical world, not so much the real world, the business world. So I can understand how maybe they don't know what they should be teaching. Now, you listen to the talking heads on a financial television show, and what do you get? You get what I call the Wall Street cheerleaders. They're playing the party line, Wall Street's line with any of the big firms. You name them, they're all pretty much the same. But what's going on with the Federal Reserve now? They pushed all of us up the risk curve with all this excessive quantitative easing, all this fake money, if you will, to use your term and the president's term. And they've created this bubble. And do they realize what they're doing? Do they realize that they're creating a bigger divide between the have and have-nots? And eventually this something's going to happen.
Amen. Amen. So let me give you bubblenomics. There's economics and bubblenomics. And what happened in 1971, as most of us know, President Nixon took us off the gold standard. Now, what does that mean? And that's where the book Fake starts.
It means our money's not pegged to anything anymore except pieces of paper. Yeah.
So anyway, what happened in 781 was, this is the new economics. It's called bubblenomics. By taking the dollar off the gold standard, this is how the government solves this problem between the Fed and the Treasury. So from 781, they started solving their problems by just printing money. 87 market crash, nothing happened. There was no recession because they just. Then in 2000, what happened was there was a slight deflation and all this, and they kept printing. And then 2008, it went down again. They call it the Great Recession. Mm-hmm. And what did they do? Still more fake money. And they blew the stock market, the real estate market, jobs, everything went into this huge bubble. Now, you don't have to be a PhD like Bernanke or Yellen of the Fed to know what's going to happen. That's the future. We cannot keep printing more money. So that's why I wrote fake. And that's why there's fake money, fake teachers, and fake assets. If we don't watch out, our country goes into the next depression with the next bust. We just cannot keep printing money. That's my point of view.
So 1 minute left. Tell our income generation members what you think they should be doing to protect themselves against the bursting of that bubble that the Fed has a hand in creating.
Well, most importantly, you've got to be very careful who you get your financial education from. You know, my rich dad always said the reason they call stockbrokers and real estate brokers is because they're more broke than you are.
Sure.
And you look at most school teachers are broke. So they should listen to programs like yours or mine or whatever, but better find out who's real and who's fake. That's the most important thing. As a pilot in Vietnam, I knew my instructors could fly because I flew with them every day. And as I got closer to going to war, my instructors got better. It's the same thing today. Choose your teachers wisely. That's my message.
Well, thank you for that. And at some point, you and I need to talk. I don't know if you realize this or not. I have a nonprofit organization I founded called the Scranton Academy for Financial Education to help solve this exact same problem. So you and I are running parallel paths here, and I appreciate and respect everything that you do. So Robert, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, David. Thanks for the time.
All right. And we'll be back in a moment. But meanwhile, during the break, go on Amazon.com and look for Robert Kiyosaki's book entitled Fake. Stay with us. We'll be right back here with more on the Income Generation.
David J. Scranton, Amazon bestselling author, money manager, and national TV host, is on a mission to educate baby boomers about the need to shift from growth to income. If you're at or near retirement, focusing on income over growth can make all the difference in the quality of your retirement. Each week, David educates America on his Newsmax TV show, The Income Generation, where he provides special reports and more to teach baby boomers about the income model.
Call now for a free copy of David's latest book. Go to soundincomestrategies.com/income to find out more.
So how do you protect yourself then with so much fakeness out there today, driving the markets, driving the economy, in the media? Most importantly, how do you make sure you're getting real unbiased guidance and information from a credible source? And not from a fake teacher or TV analyst with an obligation to the company's owners and advertisers? Well, as our guest today has rightly stressed, it all starts with education and with improving your own financial literacy. In fact, according to a study by the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, an estimated 2/3 of Americans can't pass a basic financial literacy test. That means that 2/3 of Americans don't really understand the different investment options available to them or how they work. They, in many cases, know little about the stock market and how it works, or the bond market and how it works, or for that matter, how market changes can impact their own investments. Now, whereas this is unfortunate, of course, it's also understandable. As we've discussed, the public education system has mostly neglected these important topics and continues to do so. These topics may get some coverage in basic economics class, but that's not always a requirement for every student. And, as our guest has also rightly pointed out, the teachers who teach these courses are, while mostly well-intended, also basically fake. They're teaching outdated, irrelevant concepts, usually because they themselves don't have a real understanding of today's economy and global markets. They don't understand market history or how important history is to financial decision making today. And unfortunately, most businesses also neglect to provide financial literacy training for their employees, even though it probably behooves them to have financially literate workers. So if schools and businesses aren't providing real practical and up-to-date financial education, then where can you find it? Well, there are a number of books that can be helpful, including my own, Return on Principle, our guests, Robert Kiyosaki's Fake, or Jeff Small's Turning Financial Planning Right Side Up. Another option is to keep an eye on your local newspapers, websites, and social media for information about workshops and adult education courses in your area. Many professionals do offer financial literacy training for free as a public service. Now, that may sound too good to be true, but I know from experience that most good advisors do consider themselves to be educators first. They're always eager to teach. Of course, becoming financially educated or literate is only the first step in really understanding and navigating the challenges that face today's generation of over 50-something investors. The best approach, as I always stress, is to work in partnership with a qualified financial advisor who specializes in retirement income and who understands your individual goals and your challenges. Now it's time to welcome our next guest, Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services in Melbourne, Florida, and author of the Amazon #1 best-selling book, Turning Financial Planning Right Side Up. Jeff has over 32 years of experience in the business, and he's also a good friend of the income generation and a very close friend of yours truly. Jeff, thanks for being on the show.
Dave, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Fake is the name of the show. Is there really anything fake in the financial industry? I mean, everything is real. I mean, isn't it exactly what it appears to be, right? I mean, so why are we making such a big deal about fake stuff? I'm not sure I understand.
Well, I think because there's always spin, there's always hype, there's always somebody trying to put their panache and influence from what's really happening in the markets. And I think the media is a great example of that. They overemphasize the short term. They never look at the long term.
Well, and you're a great media guy. I mean, you've been on CNBC, Fox News. Heck, you're the only person I've ever allowed to come in as a guest host when I was on vacation here on the Income Generation. You have lots of experience. So how do you maintain your independence and your lack of bias when it seems like nearly everybody else that's one of those talking heads ends up being a stock market cheerleader?
Well, it's very easy to get spun around and entranced in the financial dogma that I call it of the media. But as an investor or as a financial advisor, you really need to maintain objectivity and try and look for things underneath that will give you an edge in terms of information. And case in point, Dave, there was a great article that came out March 9th where Warren Buffett, the famous Warren Buffett, and Robert Shiller, the famous Nobel Prize winning economist, gave their projections on what the 10-year market return will be on the S&P through 2028. Mm-hmm. And the numbers were really, really bad, so we didn't hear about it in the press.
Well, yeah, that's exactly true. So what helps you maintain, in the 45 seconds we have left in this block, what helps you maintain your neutrality? Is it that you're independent? Is it that you're a fiduciary? What makes it different where it's so difficult, it seems, for all these other folks on television?
Well, what's really different is, the lack of promotion and understanding of what cycle and stage of the markets we're really in. And so if you watch the smartest guys on Wall Street get interviewed that aren't pundits, they will say there's times to turn risk on and there's times to turn risk off. And that's where investors get hurt. They get deluded with the one answer that they always have is always be in the market. And that's not always correct.
Well, and it's human nature that many of us individuals, investors, look for the silver bullet. And I think what you're saying is a lot of the talking heads in the media are too willing to give them that silver bullet, unfortunately. So, Jeff, we need to take a commercial break. We'll be right back in a moment. Stay with us if you can for another segment. And you stay with us, too. We're here with Jeff Small. I'm David Scranton, and this is The Income Generation. We'll be right back. And welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton. We're here today with our good friend Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services in Melbourne, Florida, and yes, author of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, Turning Financial Planning Right Side Up. So, Jeff, speaking about turning financial planning right side up, when I was out of town just a few weeks ago and I asked you to do me a big favor and come in as a guest host. You said, I will under one circumstance, and that is you let me talk about all the artificiality in valuations caused by all the corporate stock buybacks. Why do you put the corporate stock buybacks under this category of fake?
Well, I think you have to look at the history of buybacks. They weren't allowed until Ronald Reagan allowed it back until 1982. And so what happens is if Apple buys back 190 billion of their own shares, they're taking those shares out of the market. Hence, they shrink the number of shares outstanding. So when there's demand in the markets, the share price rises more quickly. So it's a form of artificial stimulus that probably should not be allowed unless actual corporations are allowed to use their cash and not issue bonds to buy back shares.
Okay. So it's kind of a way of artificial stimulus by corporate America. But how about the artificial stimulus going on by central banks around the world? You know, our own Fed was giving stimulus for a while, and then they were trying to reverse it and pull it back. And it seemed like they did a complete course reversal back to stimulus in the Fed meeting just a few short weeks ago. What's this all about, and what does it mean for us?
Well, I think that the central banks like the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank or the Bank of Japan have a bigger mission than seeking full employment. Their mission is to prop up asset prices. And so over the last 10 years, this incredible stock market run we've had has been subsidized by many forms of artificial stimulus other than true economic growth. And that mantra will continue with the central banks. They will keep asset prices as high as possible because they want to keep issuing debt to expand the economy, because there really is no economic growth when you have a long-term secular demographic of an aging population, not just domestically, but globally.
So what's the methods of their madness? Is it the wealth effect? Is it that, well, gosh, if we can push people up the risk curve and we can have an asset recovery, which is what we've really seen, right? The stock market going up through the moon, that people will feel more affluent. Maybe they'll actually go out and spend more money and stimulate the economy. Do you think that's what they're thinking indirectly?
I don't really I think their mission has changed dramatically, Dave, and I think everybody's committing a huge oversight in our industry by not realizing the central banks of the world, their number one concern is to make sure governments don't fail financially, and number two, to prevent a systemic financial breakdown like we had back in 2008 and 2009, when we had many institutions on the brink of failure. And even at that time in Florida, 60% of all the banks were on the verge of being consolidated because they did not have enough to meet their stress tests.
Yeah, well, the problem is we're so far down the road right now with all the stimulus and all the debt and all the fake money that we just hope that everything doesn't end up with a big explosion. I know you and I have had those conversations off air. So Jeff, thank you very much for being part of our show today. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you also for watching, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more here on our last segment of the Income Generation. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us today for another episode of The Income Generation. I'd like to thank you, our new and returning viewers. You know, the Mirage in Las Vegas is one of the most famous casinos in the world, as most people know. It's called the Mirage, presumably because it was built in the desert. But the name is also fitting because casinos in general really do create illusion. Walk into one and you're surrounded by the exciting prospect of winning. Words like jackpot, lucky, win big are everywhere. But the percentage of people who hit the jackpot and win big in the casino is very, very small compared to the number of people who walk out as losers. In fact, a casino's business model is built on and actually depends upon the reality that most people there will lose money most of the time. Now, of course, a casino simply cannot market itself quite that way. It has to paint really just the opposite picture, a place of promise, a place of good fortune where the odds are in your favor. But that image is fake. An illusion. And as we've discussed on today's show, Wall Street's business model also often depends on selling an illusion. It depends on Wall Street CEOs and much of the financial media speaking optimistically about the stock market as often as they possibly can. It depends on keeping everyday investors like you invested as much as possible in order to please shareholders, and oftentimes regardless of the risk involved. It depends on much of the media and many advisors working to convince you that outdated buy and hold strategies in the stock market are still viable, that they're the best and the only strategies for investors seeking a reasonable return in portfolio growth. Well, as we've also seen on today's show, not only are those claims fake, they're built around an entire system that is in many ways also increasingly artificial, which is just one reason that I, like today's guest, often compare investing in the stock market to gambling in a casino. It's not a real investment strategy because it's built on an illusion and because you have no control over the company you're investing in, any more than you have control over the dice that you throw across the craps table. Real investing involves real strategies, strategies designed to protect your principal from market volatility and to protect it from spend down, strategies to help you generate dependable retirement income at a competitive rate and to grow your portfolio organically through strategic reinvestment. And that is as real as it gets. Thanks for watching. If you're close to retirement and you really want to know how to protect and maximize your money, it's absolutely essential that you stay informed and up to date. And as you know, right here is where you can do it on the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and we'll see you next week. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation.